Brené Brown once said, stories are data with a soul, which I really like. You can give clear, concise information to an audience, that's great, but it might not grab them. If, however, there's a story there, it's effortless for an audience to take it in, right? We've told stories for as long as we've been able to use language because they're a fantastic way of engaging people.
Hello, and welcome to episode 110 of the Quiet and Strong podcast, especially for introverts. I'm your host, David Hall, and the creator of quietandstrong.com. This is a weekly podcast dedicated to understanding the strengths and needs of introverts. Introversion is not something to fix, but to be embraced. Normally, we'll air each episode on Monday. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite platform. Leave a review. That would mean a lot to me. Tell a friend about the podcast. Help get the word out there that introversion is a beautiful thing. Jon Torrens has worked as a designer at games companies including Sony and Electronic Arts, and as a professional stand-up comic for a few years. So he knows how to engage and motivate and occasionally be funny too. Now, as a coach and speaker, he teaches effective communication using his personal skills to both show and tell. He delivers training for a range of clients in London and Cambridge, including Foster & Partners, Raspberry Pi, Redgate, Microsoft Research, Creative Assembly, and Cambridge University. Unique insights from the worlds of computer game design and stand-up comedy enable even the most introverted of his clients to deliver presentations that delight and motivate their audiences. All right. I'm excited for my guest, Jon. Jon, welcome to the Quiet and Strong podcast.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to get into the work you do, presentations and communication skills, especially for introverts. But before we do that, let's just talk a little bit about your story. Like, how did you come to learn that you were an introvert, and how did you embrace that?
Well, for a long time, I thought I was an extrovert. So although I don't particularly enjoy it, I was used to standing up in front of people and speaking. So at school, when we each had to read out a portion of a book, I was quite happy to do that. And I was good at that, even if I wasn't really good at anything else apart from maybe art. Or I would do a reading in church, and that was fine. And it was only when I first became self-employed that I went to a talk and someone explained the difference between introvert and extrovert, rather the true definition, which is it's how you recharge, it's how you get your energy. And suddenly everything slotted into place. And I realized that whilst I can stand up in front of people and speak, I need that time on my own, and that massive need for isolation, even though I'm married with 2 kids. It's tricky. That all made sense, and all that, going to a nightclub on my own, or I have friends, and throughout my life I've had a few friends, but it's only a small circle, and I'm just as happy being on my own. So I learned that, and everything kind of clicked, which was lovely.
Yeah, sometimes we need to be alone, sometimes we don't mind. We do need others, but often it's a small circle of friends, which is completely normal. And sometimes we have to figure that out. What would you say that you learned was a strength, or sometimes I say superpower, as an introvert?
I think it's the preparation and thinking about what's coming up. Now, of course, you can overdo that. You can overthink and you can get anxious. But the preparation is key. So when I've worked with extroverts, they're happy to they're happy to improvise on the day because they know that they can wing it. Essentially, they can have a back and forth with someone, and that's fine. And so what they do is they won't prepare, and that's a great strategy while it works. But as soon as it stops working, they've got nothing to fall back on. Whereas the introvert will be thinking about every possibility, and whilst they may get anxious about it, they will actually prepare. So I think that's real planning and consideration. I see that as the introvert superpower.
Yeah, definitely. I've watched other extrovert colleagues and friends give speeches and presentations and just wing it, and people think it's great, and I've definitely been jealous of that. But then I realized, what? That's not how I'm ever going to be successful. I need to prepare, but not only do I need to prepare? But like you're saying, it's actually a really good thing because you take some time and really put together something great, right?
Yeah, but also you're considering possibilities and what might happen. So, I mean, I can interact and I like doing that and being spontaneous, but it worries me if I have to do that too much. I like to have something ready. So I think there's a good balance between having lots of things ready and then picking and choosing what you need. If you go in with a very clear structure in your mind, sometimes you can think, oh, it's all falling apart if any part of that structure doesn't work. Whereas, of course, going with the flow a little bit is the way forward.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. It's like, yeah, we need to prepare, but there does come a point where you could over prepare and things aren't going to go as planned, probably ever, right?
No, exactly. And I mean, Mike Tyson said everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth.
Right.
And Eisenhower had a lovely one, which he repeated in many interviews. He was talking about war, but of course it became relevant to everyone, which is I've always found planning to be essential, but plans to be useless, which I really liked. So thinking and considering everything that might happen, but then on the day, you can't plan for that. He said planning for emergencies is stupid because that's an emergency is something you haven't planned, right? You can't do
Right. Yeah, I love that. So on this show, we talk about the strengths of introverts, the needs of introverts, and strategies for success. But we also do plenty of myth busting. Is there a myth out there that you would like to dispel about introversion?
Yeah, I think it's that introverts aren't good communicators. I think that's a myth. I think a lot of people, whether they realize they fit into that introvert mindset or not, they know how they are and they just think, oh, it's not for me, or this other person is gifted. It's okay for them. They can do all that. But actually, I think introverts can make fantastic communicators. And I have a theory that a lot of stand-ups, maybe even most stand-ups, are introverts because you spend a hell of a lot of time on your own. You're at home trying to write material. You're traveling on your own. I mean, ultimately, when you're performing, you are kind of on your own, especially if it's not going well. But you've got to. It's tons of planning. The idea that you're just walking up there and being brilliant is of course nonsense. There's a routine, and you may improvise around it, but it's taken tons of planning, tons of experimentation, tons of just trying stuff out. So I think that's the myth that you can't be a good communicator and you have to be an extrovert. I would argue that someone who's really thought about it and shows that they thought about it is possibly more engaging.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely a myth. I'm so happy to have you on the show for that reason because we're definitely going to bust that one throughout this show because it's not that we can't be good communicators, it's just we might need to take a different approach. And someone that understands introversion like yourself can help that other introvert understand how they can have the best approach.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the joyful things that I get to do is if I'm coaching a group of people, at the beginning, I'll say, right, everyone's going to stand up and introduce themselves. And of course, everyone hates that. There's nothing, no more chilling words in the English
Yeah,
language than let's go around the table, right? No one wants
right.
to do that. And because you don't
No.
listen to what anyone else is saying because you're thinking what you're going to say. But in that moment where I've pushed them slightly cruelly, but I've pushed them out of their comfort zone, they introduce themselves. So they'll speak for a minute or so. And I've been very vague. I haven't stated who we are as an audience. I've said, just talk about yourself. I haven't said whether they should talk about their personal life or their work life. But typically what happens is they'll do it and they'll be fine, right? They'll be clear. They may even look confident. And they sit down and I say, right, how was that for you? Right. And they say, oh, it's terrible. I hated it. Right? Which is perfectly normal thing. And then, as I say, generally it's gone fairly well. And I'll say, right, what did everyone else think? Can you give some feedback? And they say things like, oh yeah, you look really confident. It was really clear. And you can see this confusion because the idea we have of how we are is often just skewed. It's wrong. It's inaccurate. And so it's lovely to do that, to show actually you think you're here, but in fact you're here. You're much more able than you think.
You busted another myth there. And I've thought the same thing that most stand-up comedians are introverts as well. you're observing things. And, I have no idea what percentage, but I think it is pretty high because people often say, oh, yeah, well, actors, stand-up comedians, they can't be introverts, but the truth is that many great comedians are introverts. And knowing what an introvert is, you and I could kind of tell
Yeah,
who the
that's it.
introverts, and they have great power of observation and just look at the absurdities of life and find the funniness in it all.
Exactly, and that's the key. I mean, a stand-up is always desperate to get new material, right? You want new stuff because it's interesting for you as the comic, and so you need to be able to do that. You need to be able to sit there and just see people or notice conversations and just see this stuff, and then think, right, there's something there. What can I do with that? And so, yeah, you're just sitting there in your own head, running through stuff, just thinking, is this good? Is this good? I mean, Seinfeld's done some great stuff. He's got a little bit on YouTube where how you write a joke, and he's writing just a bit of material about Pop-Tarts, and it's just lovely. But you can see it's just him. He's completely happy in his own company with a biro and some paper, and that's it. And yeah, in his own head.
That's funny that you said him, Jerry Seinfeld, because that's who I was thinking of too. I used to love the show, and it was just so clever the way it was interwoven. And he's definitely an introvert. Maybe people don't realize that because they don't understand what introversion is, but that's what makes him brilliant. Is he's always thinking about things and observing things, and so you did that for many years. So tell us about that. How did you get into stand-up? How did that lead to what you're doing now?
Yeah, it's a funny one. I guess a lot of people say, "Oh, I fell into this and I fell into that," but I did fall into it. So I did pretty badly at school. Art was going to be my thing. That was the only thing I was really good at. But I did quite like writing stories. And so I did an art course, and then someone who I'd known on my art course after we left college got a job at a video games company. And I thought, great, I love video games. And this was before that was a known career path. And I went to work there. But then I'd been watching a few bits of stand-up comedy, and this was in London. So this was the early 90s. And one of the programmers, which is quite unusual, really wanted to start doing stand-up comedy. And so we decided we would both do it. And so we both started gigging around London. At that time, there's all these little clubs, a lot of them just little rooms above pubs and behind pubs and things. And there were hundreds of them. And so you could go and do them and, maybe get paid a few pounds or no money. But you could try stuff out. And we would compare notes. And so that was really nice, where we'd say, oh, this gig's really good, or this comic's really good. And we'd be observing their techniques and trying stuff out. And I remember discovering the pullback and reveal, which is, I was doing this thing and then this happened, and you're basically saying, actually, I was in a supermarket or in a shop, and I thought, this is amazing. And then my friend went, that's the oldest, that's just the most hack thing you can do. And so that was funny. But I started doing that, and I just got hooked. And even though it was sort of terrifying, I felt like I needed to try it out and do it. And you get addicted. And that's the thing. It's the most incredible experience. You only need that one reasonably good gig, which might be, a dozen people laughing, and you think, this is it. This is all I need to do. And so you become a fiend and you have to keep doing it just to get that fix.
So what part did that play in what you're doing now?
Yes, sorry, that was the other part of your question. I beg your pardon.
Yeah.
So I did that for a long time. At the same time as being a video games designer, I went full-time at stand-up, didn't become a superstar, left that, went back to video games, and that was fine. And then I'd seen some pretty terrible presentations in the video games industry, and it just sort of popped into my head. And I talked to someone else who's very smart about this as well. And I talked to someone else as well who's very smart. I'm not saying I'm very smart. And they suggested this thing. They said, look, people need these skills. These are skills from stand-up comedy. If you're giving a presentation, you need storytelling and performance. And this was staring me in the face, really. I was doing okay in video games, but it wasn't great. And I realized, these are these skills that I've got. And so I tried it out, and I ran a little session at a games company I was at. It was almost like Fight Club, but, with short talks, speech club. And it worked, and we gave each other feedback. And I realized, this is a thing. I can do this. And so I set up on my own. It's almost exactly 10 years ago. And I realized, yeah, it works because people have a fear of speaking. And so if you can help them with that, then that's a viable career path. And yeah, it's worked.
So, how do you help them overcome that fear of speaking? How do introverts gain
Well,
confidence in their communication?
the first way, I mean, I can tell them lots of things, but the first way is really to push them out there to do it. So, like I said, I'll get people up to speak and show them that wasn't as bad as you thought. You're not as bad at this as you think. And here are some techniques, here are some shortcuts. So it comes down to writing, how to create material, telling stories. A story does a lot of work, right? You might only have to remember a place or a company name or a person, and that is enough to spark all the things that you need to tell that story. And within that story, you might prove qualities and abilities that you have. And by getting people to actually do it and pointing out, yeah, you did this thing. So typically people will speak a little too quickly. They might not smile very much because they want to impress and look professional. But generally you're showing them, yeah, you can do this. Here's another technique. Try this out. And so I'll get people to write a short piece and give them feedback, and they'll realize actually it's not as hard as you think. But you have to prove it out. And I'll get them to do something very short and sharp. I'll give them 10 minutes to write a 5-minute piece, because typically we think, oh, right, I have to give a presentation, or I have to speak in front of these people. I need to do lots of work, and you should do lots of preparation, but you can get to the stage where it's good enough very, very quickly. The rest is all just finessing.
Okay, so many questions to follow up on that. You brought up storytelling. How important is storytelling in giving a good presentation or a speech?
I think it's vital. In her TED talk, Brené Brown, actually, she's probably done a few TED talks, but Brené Brown once said, stories are data with a soul, which I really like. You can give clear, concise information to an audience, that's great, but it might not grab them. If, however, there's a story there, it's effortless for an audience to take it in, right? We've told stories for as long as we've been able to use language, because they're a fantastic way of engaging people. I guess on a very basic hunter-gatherer level, we would be interested in someone else's experience because it was survival. So it would be, there's danger here, there's food here, let's go this way, or I did this thing. I find we're interested in stories, particularly if it's something that we might encounter ourselves. So the story might be my neighbor saying, I don't know, we got a new front door, or we had something done to our house. And immediately I'm thinking, oh, who did you get? Because I want to know, what are the stupid things you did? I'm going to avoid those. What are the clever things you did? I'm going to copy that, right? And that's how we collaborate and help each other. Whatever you do, don't do this. Top tip, do this thing. I think that's the sort of fundamental attraction of the story. But yeah, it just goes straight in. If you start off with, this is me, this is what I'm going to talk about, that's fine, that's clear. But if you start with, a week ago, I was in this place and I had this challenge and I was really struggling, it's going straight in. People don't even have to get into listening mode. It's just so much more engaging. So yeah, I think stories they're also a great way of demonstrating qualities that you want people to infer. So you could claim, I work hard, I'm great at solving problems, I'm a brilliant collaborator, right? And that might be sincere and it could be true. But if you tell a story of how you achieved this thing, let's say that you faced a problem with some other people, you overcame it, you would demonstrate all those qualities and then they would infer those things from it. But yeah, stories do so much. They're wonderful.
What makes a good story?
Generally, I think Misfortune is really good. So, a story where everything goes well isn't very interesting. So things going horribly wrong. The hero's journey, the classic story arc as defined by Joseph Campbell, and then very skillfully by Christopher Vogler in his book, The Writer's Journey, which I can thoroughly recommend. There are lots of elements, but typically it's there and back again, right? It's Lord of the Rings. It's there's a villain in a distant place. I read one thing that argued that every James Bond story is basically that. There's a hideously deformed evil creature, typically a man, of course, who's doing evil stuff and needs to be stopped. So you leave your ordinary safe place with maybe a mentor character. And I'm going back to the more classical Lord of the Rings hero's journey style. You travel there and you overcome ever increasing risks. You make alliances and friendships and fall in love and learn to fight. And then finally you fight the evil Dark Lord. Now, of course, that's the sort of the classical, almost fantasy world. But to take that and apply it to everyday life, it's basically this person wanted something and there was a barrier or a problem happened. This is how we overcame it. So TED Talks, very commonly I find, use the structure of, I had a terrible experience. I overcame it. I'm stronger now. Here's what I learned, for the benefit of the audience, which is lovely. And so they'll start off with something quite unpleasant often. And I think, yeah, a story where you say, look, I messed up. You know, I did something really stupid, right? It's just going to be a funny story. And the fact that you're comfortable sharing it, I think is very attractive to an audience.
Yeah. It's funny because like the great movies that we watch, it has all those elements, you know. You mentioned like the Lord of the Rings, a movie with the Hobbit just hanging around in the Shire, just doing boring things. Nobody's going to watch that.
It's not going to happen. Or indeed, Luke doing chores on his
right.
in his desert farm. Like nothing's happened today. All right, that's good. Meanwhile, you know about the Empire? Yes, let's go. Right? It's yeah.
Cool. When you're coaching, do you find that people are ready to tell stories? Are they natural storytellers, or do they need permission to tell stories, if that makes sense?
I don't think so. I think when I say, hey, introduce yourself, sometimes people will sort of tell their story, generally not intentionally either. So they'll say they might have moved to the UK from another country. They might have worked at different companies. So they'll often tell a nice story, an arc. And also it's lovely because it's sort of ongoing. It's like, and now I work here, but of course that story can continue. So I think that happens fairly organically, but you're right. It's tricky. You can't just say, hey, tell us a story about you. But if you ask them to talk about a particular experience, then they might come up with something. A lot of the time I find, I don't know if it's a particularly British thing, but if you ask someone from the UK and say, hey, tell us all about you, firstly, they don't know why you'd want to know. There's sort of confusion. So I don't know what to say, but also I don't know why you're asking me that question. Whereas from other countries, and I would say perhaps the US, you know, and obviously there's a massive generalization, but I think you could point a microphone in front of an 8-year-old from the US and say, hey, who are you? And they'll be ready to go, right? There are all kinds of things happening, which is lovely. So I do tell people to collect stories, you know, have a think about your experiences, have a think about things you've done, because it's great to be armed with as many stories as possible. So when you're talking to people, whatever the situation, maybe you have something that's relevant to what they've said.
How do you do that yourself? You write them down or keep some kind of journal? Or
I do remember I think I try and remember them, but I did. It was a good idea, and I need to go back to. I did have a document. I thought I need to find out what stories I've got, and so yeah, you can do that. And as I said, you could just have one word that reminds you of it, you know, or a phrase, you know, just a few short words, so you could have a list. So yeah, I need to go back and look at that. But generally, the way my brain pings around, whatever people say to me, there'll be something that, you know, that I'll join onto it.
so how do you get started off in a presentation? How do you make a good first impression?
That is a great question. You need to prepare thoroughly. I'm going to say that now. I think what I really like is speaking words out loud in order to write, which might seem odd. The natural instinct of most people is to sit down, open up a Word document, or even open up slide software and start creating stuff. But I think there's a great power and great shortcut in just standing up, possibly walking around and just talking it through. Of course, you have to have an idea of what you're going to talk about and maybe what the sections are. But you just start talking, and something wonderful happens there where I think you free up a little part of your brain. It's a bit like if you try and design something in a software package, that's okay. But if you start sketching with a pencil and pen on paper, like it kind of it liberates you a bit, I find, and makes you a little bit freer in the way that you're creating things. So walk around, talk about it, and then capture those words. So that could be stopping to note them down. It could be recording it. And I appreciate listening to yourself, or even worse, watching yourself is a deeply unpleasant experience, but it's incredibly useful. Capture those words and use that to inform that process. And the shortcut of it is that it takes you to a place where you'd be much further down the line if you did the conventional method of sitting down and writing, because you'd sit down and write the thing and think, well, this is great. Typically, we don't write the same way we speak. When you then go to deliver it, you'll encounter all the problems because you haven't said the words out loud first. So what I like to do is to say the words out loud, capture those, and then take it from there.
Yeah, that's true. Often you write something and then you try to speak it, and it doesn't sound right.
No, it's funny how even a simple collection of words or a sequence will trip you up. You'll find that you just can't say these three words in order, so you need to change them, and that's fine. But if you've never said the words out loud until the day itself, that can be an unpleasant surprise.
So, what makes a great presentation?
If you look at the TED Talks, it tends to be people are talking about something that matters, right? So we may not all have that lucky gift of we're talking about something that matters. It may be a meeting on a Tuesday about something quite everyday or even mundane. But I think if you can talk about something that's really important to you and the audience sees that, then I think that'll really grab them. And I think that's what I like to see. It's like great speeches. That person is really carried along with it. Like this is an important thing. Now, of course, that could still be something at your workplace or just talking to a friend. But I think if it's important, I think that can be really engaging and compelling. But then, yes, you need to edit and make it nice and short as possible. I believe the Gettysburg Address is famously only a few minutes long, right? So it's like 4 paragraphs. Talking about something that matters, keeping it really concise. If you go back to, I think it was Aristotle who said the 3 methods of persuasion, and bear in mind this is 350 BC, but I think he's pretty much nailed it. Ethos, logos, and pathos. So the ethos is how you operate. So you might start off with, this is what motivates me. This is what drives me. This is how I like to do things. Or logos would be logic. So that's facts and information. So do you know what percentage of these happened last year? Or what do you think this statistic represents? Or, hard fact. And then pathos is the way I understand it is the audience's emotion in relation to what you're talking about. So what does this make you think of? How do you feel about these things? And the idea being, if you touch on any of those, or even better, all 3, you'll grab and persuade any audience. But that can be a really nice way to kick off. Getting straight into it. As I said, you could say, I'm going to talk about these things. These are the sections. Or you could just start off with no introduction. Hello. What's the first thing you did this morning? Right. Just get straight into it. And with a question as well. I think a question is a great way to engage an audience.
I know you work with people on their mindset and giving a presentation. How do you get into a good mindset?
Fundamentally, it's by reminding yourself of the facts. So there's a psychologist called Rick Hansen who said our minds are like Teflon for good experiences and Velcro for bad ones. So in terms of our evolution, our ancestors survived because they worried about things that might happen. Great, good for them. Unfortunately, that now translates into anxiety for us now. Oh, hang on, I've lost my train of thought. Fantastic. Right, where were we? Ask me again. So this is the way my brain works. I thought that's good. I'll talk about Rick Hansen, and now I've forgotten. Where were we? You have to remind me.
Yeah. Why is that we, Teflon and Velcro, why do we remember the bad more often than we do the good?
It's a survival mechanism, and it's from the era of fight or flight and freeze. It's to protect us, help us survive, but it's no longer useful. Yes, I remember now. Brilliant. Thank you. You've done it. Remind yourself of the positive truths, and that's the thing. So that's it. Now I remember now. God, thank goodness. It's honestly, it's a pinball machine in my head. People will often worry, or usually I think worry about what's coming. Like, will I remember the next thing? And before a talk or presentation, they might focus on all the terrible things that might happen. And so they worry about all those things rather than thinking, I've got this, or visualizing success, which can be very, very useful. But the positive truths will be almost obvious. And it's what a trusted friend or colleague would tell you. You know your stuff. You've done your preparation. Of course, if you haven't done your preparation, then you can't tell yourself that. But if you've done your preparation and you've got the foundation of spending the time writing and rehearsing, so you've got something, you know your stuff, you've done your preparation, the audience is on your side. And then there's simple things like you're going to talk for 20 minutes. You're going to answer some questions. If you don't know the answer to any of those questions, that's absolutely fine. And then you're going to finish and go and have a cup of coffee. Another very useful truth is it's not as significant for the audience as it is for you. Even in the most important talk, someone halfway through will think, "Ooh, I wonder if there's ham for lunch." Right? They're just, they'll go. And that's fine. And it's nothing personal. It doesn't mean you're not doing a great job, but this is a smaller part of their day than it is for you. We're all bit players in someone else's story and heroes in our own. So you're fretting about it. It may be a big deal. It may be this pitch may be really important, but at the end of the day, literally at the end of the day, it's not going to matter that much. And, if I face a problem, I'll think, will I care about this tomorrow? Will I care about this in a week's time? No, it's really, I like to remind myself, nobody cares. And I mean that in a really nice way. I mean, no one cares about this little thing that I'm anxious about.
Yeah. You're definitely, we tend to think about ourselves more than other people do, for sure. I like the points that you just made, because you should have confidence, because there's a reason why you're giving that presentation, because you do know that you were asked to do that because that's your expertise. Feel confident in that, right?
100%.
And then, we were kind of talking about introverts need to be prepared. How is preparation different for introverts versus extroverts when it comes to giving a presentation?
I think whilst I think I mentioned that introverts might be able to focus on it more, there is also that problem of doing it too much. So I think the introvert will naturally gravitate towards doing lots of preparation, but they also may have an accompanying anxiety. So I'd like to think the introvert will be more than happy to spend lots of time preparing, but something to be aware of. Let's say you were using slides. I know that most introverts will think, "Oh, I'll make really wonderful slides and then no one will look at me and I'm safe," which of course is not the case. And obviously people are going to look at you, but also the slides may fail. And so it's down to you. So you will be the medium of that talk and the slides are just backing you up. But I think an introvert will naturally gravitate towards preparation more, which is a very good thing.
I know we were talking about this before I hit record, but you can only prepare so much. So how do you deal with those situations that you're not ready for? And you probably had to do that a lot as a stand-up comedian, or, in presentations when people are asking things that you're not sure of. How do you deal with those things that, you do your best preparation, but then there's things that you can't prepare for?
Certainly there'll be, the unexpected will always happen. There'll always be something there. I think there's appreciating the absurdity of your situation. So being able to just laugh at it and see, right, this thing isn't working. I think being really open and honest about it is really good as well. And just saying, right, this is not what I meant to show you. The audience is looking for emotional guidance. How should they feel about it? How do you feel about yourself giving this talk? What do they see in you? And so if something goes wrong and you look worried and you apologize, then that might confirm to them that something's gone wrong, or convey to them that something's gone wrong and you should have known better. But if, on the other hand, you smile and say, right, I didn't mean to do that, here's the next thing, it tells them you're in a safe pair of hands and it probably wasn't that important. I think you can persuade a very ambivalent audience that things are going much worse than they actually are, just because you look freaked out. Whereas if you go with it, and realize, yeah, I can just go to the next section. It doesn't really matter. I think that's really good for an audience. But yeah, they're just looking for guidance. So, and also, confidence is a trick, right? That first moment of walking out on stage, being announced, if you can get that first bit right, then I think you can set yourself up for success.
And where does your body language and nonverbal, where does that all come in having that confidence and in your presence?
Oh, it's massive because you're sending out signals. If you stand the right way and you appear to be confident, you're sending out lots of signals to the audience that say, I know what I'm doing, I'm credible, which works even if you're feeling really nervous. But what it also does is it sends signals to your own subconscious, your brain, if you like, that say, I like doing this. I'm comfortable doing it. And so there's this incredible empowering act of stepping into the shoes of being that confident person that you want to be. It's amazingly self-fulfilling, where you stride out there. And of course, this is a great thing to practice and rehearse. If you happen to be giving a talk at a big conference, I would always recommend go to that sound check, get on the stage beforehand and get used to it. But you stride out there, you stand up properly, you smile, you gesture, and you say, hello, everyone, I'm going to do this. And it sets up what I call a positive feedback loop, where they think, oh, thank God, this is going to be okay. That's all we want. We just want it to be okay, just not terrible. And you show that you've prepared. And so you've got something good on your slides, and maybe you mention something specific to the audience. And they think, great, this is going to be wonderful. After that, it almost doesn't matter what happens, as long as you've done something where you've prepared fairly well. But on the other hand, if you flounder at the beginning because you haven't done your preparation, or more specifically to what you've asked, if you're in a physical pose that looks nervous or defensive, it's going to send out the wrong signals, and it's going to confirm to your own brain that actually I'm uncomfortable. The Amy Cuddy TED Talk, Your Body Language May Shape Who You Are, talks about this, where a group of people did confident poses and raised their hands in the air and did the Wonder Woman pose, which is a fantastic one, hands on the hips. And I recommend if you do that, do it before your talk, not during, unless you feel that it would help. It sends these signals to your brain that basically says, I know what I'm doing. And smiling does it as well. You smile, that if you smile when you're on the phone, it changes the sound of your voice. People can tell that you're smiling on the phone, but it sends a signal to your brain that says, yeah, I'm happy. And it works even if you're feeling terrified.
Yeah, great points. So you've mentioned slides a couple times. What's your general philosophy behind like the visuals that you use?
Keep them simple. Keep them absolutely simple. Start with no slides. Honestly, start with no slides. Write your talk. Get used to saying it. See how long it takes. And then, to deliver the whole thing. And then look at it and think, do I need slides anywhere? For some people, there will be points, maybe throughout, where they're absolutely essential, where you have a wonderful picture. Maybe you're talking about art, right? Then you have an image of the art. Or you're talking about some data. And if you have a graph, it conveys lots of information really quickly. However, if you're not talking about something that requires those things, you may find, and a lot of TED Talks don't use slides at all, and none of the great speeches ever had any PowerPoint in them. You may find that you can deliver this talk and convey the ideas, get them into your audience's heads with no visuals whatsoever. That's way more powerful. And I think if the other people who are presenting all use slides, and you walk up there and you go, right, I won't be needing this. Let me talk to you about X. That can be pretty powerful. It can make you stand out. It can make you look a lot more credible. And it's just more interesting for an audience. So I would start with none and then introduce them as you need them. But don't feel you have to have a slide for every moment that you're speaking, because you don't. A nice little trick you can do is to have a slide with maybe your name and the title of your talk, if you're using slides. And it's up there when you start. And you talk, and then you keep talking, and you talk about a few different things. And after about 30 seconds or a minute, the audience realizes, oh, you're not using those. And your credibility at that point is boosted massively. Oh, and also another thing is, if you do have slides, if you're ready to deliver it without the slides, if they do fail, and let's face it, the tech can fail easily, it's really nice for an audience and makes you look very credible if you say, all right, that's not working. Well, anyway, here's what I was going to talk about. Whereas a lot of people will say, oh, we'll need to get the IT person in. We need to fix this. And the audience is sitting there thinking, would you know this stuff or not? Because these slides had better be amazing when they come back.
Right. Yeah, you got to be ready and I've had that happen to me before for sure. You have to be ready to go ahead and give your presentation if the technology does fail.
Yeah, and there's all sorts of things that can go wrong. I mean, I like to get into a venue really early just to go through all the tech stuff and find out what leads we need to use and whether sometimes I'll send slides to someone and they won't have the fancy typeface that I've installed and it all looks wrong. So yeah, it's good to get there early to fix those problems, but also just to ground yourself and get familiar with the space.
Yeah, that gives you confidence too, especially as an introvert, to be prepared and know what the space is going to look like. So whenever you can do that.
Yeah, that familiarity I think counts for a lot, because in that moment where you start to give your talk and you're feeling super nervous, just being familiar with what it feels like to stand in that place and look at everyone, what it feels like to use the clicker or whatever device you've got to advance the slides, that will really help calm you down. Whereas if you're going into a slight panic, which is perfectly normal, if you're really unfamiliar with everything and then something happens where, I don't know, you trip over something or you can't work out where your glass of water is, that will throw you off completely and derail the whole thing.
Yeah, yeah. All right, John, we've talked about so many great things. Is there anything else when it comes to presentations, especially for introverts, that we didn't talk about yet?
I'm not sure, and I should have an answer to that. I think this is general, but I think it's important to state anyway. So this may not be introvert specific, but perhaps it is to get as much experience as possible. And I guess that's a simple fact, but it's really important. So even if you've managed to avoid speaking in front of a group for a long time, and the only time you speak in front of a big group is at a conference, say, taking the opportunity to speak in front of just a handful of people at a little meeting that's just for a couple of minutes, doing that as often as you can, I think can give you great rewards. Some people say confidence is like a muscle. It's something that needs to be exercised and used as much as possible. And I would definitely go with that. It's like physical fitness. You can do little talks. You can talk for a short amount of time frequently. You could do it every day. That's fantastic. So I think getting experience of any kind is really useful. And while your instinct may be to avoid it at all costs, if you can push yourself out of your comfort zone, then you can really make huge leaps.
Yeah. And I always say too, as an introvert, we're masters of reflection. So you can always think about, how'd that go? What might I do differently next time? And just keep building and just put yourself out there, like you're saying.
Yeah. And another one, now you've made me think of it, is get feedback. So I gave a talk last night and it was fine. And it was to a small group. But afterwards I thought, oh, that didn't go so well. Like I wasn't happy about it. And I find even after good talks or good sessions where I've been training people, afterwards I'll all those doubts will come in. And so I think it can be really useful to get feedback from other people and say, right, how did that go? Just tell me absolutely straight. And a lot of the time I find there are lots of positives that you simply weren't aware of. And to remind yourself of those positives is really important.
Yeah, like the Velcro and the Teflon. Keep the positives
Exactly.
in your head because we remember the bad too often.
Yes.
Just tell everybody a little bit about the work you do and how people can find out more about you.
Okay, so my website is jontorrens.co.uk. So that's jontorrens.co.uk. And the work I do is with individuals and groups, and I help them with speaking confidence. So the most popular format for that is normally the standing up in front of people with some slides, but I help people with interviews and networking and meetings and other communication formats. And I principally work with introverts, and I like to make it as useful and practical as possible but also as enjoyable as possible. So I can't guarantee there'll be laughs, but there are generally laughs.
Okay. That's great. Jon, it's been so good to have you on the show. And introverts can be amazing communicators. They might just need to learn a little bit about what the best approach for them is.
Absolutely. And thank you so much. It's been really good fun.
All right. Thanks, Jon. Thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to further connecting with you. Reach out at david@quietandstrong.com or check out the quietandstrong.com website, which includes blog posts, links to social media, and other items. Send me topics or guests you would like to see on the show. If you're interested in getting to know yourself better, there's now a free Type Finder personality assessment on the Quiet and Strong website. This free assessment will give you a brief report, including the 4-letter Myers-Briggs code. I'll add a link to the show notes. There's so many great things about being an introvert, so we need those to be understood. Get to know your introverted strengths and needs and be strong.